But it's most moving when it's a child, isn't it? And it's amazing how they can survive sometimes in frigid nights, and yet if they weren't searched for, many would perish because of exposure to the weather. Now, I say this because we're going to talk about encouraging one another, because there's something far more serious than just losing your life on this earth. And I don't want to minimize that for a second. But if we extend this type of energy for those who are physically lost, why wouldn't we expend the same type of energy for those who are spiritually drifting into death, spiritual death? And so we want to talk about that, the idea of encouraging one another. And to do so, look with me in Hebrews chapter 3, where we just have this exhortation by the Hebrew writer about, well, encouraging one another. This is one of the warnings. There's 5 then in the book of Hebrews. And here's the third one where he says, take care, verse 12 of chapter 3. Take care, brethren, lest there should be in of you an evil, unbelieving heart in falling away from the living God. He says there's a real danger for people falling away from the faith, and then by implication, they're losing their salvation or losing their soul. Well, the solution is in verse 13. Encourage one another day after day, as long as it's still called today, lest any of you be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. So there's a progression that goes on. Without the encouragement that happens continually day after day, there's a real possibility that people's heart can be hardened by the continual practice of sin. And we'll try to expound on that. So here we see that he says there's a problem when people are missing spiritually. And when they're missing, we cannot allow ourselves to sit idly by and not search for them. Now, I understand that when someone's missing overnight and the temperatures get down to 30, there's kind of a panic because we realize it's life or death. And when someone is missing spiritually, I'm talking about in our assembly, or we don't see them, we don't regard it as immediate life and death matter. And we don't think, well, write them off, they missed one service. But yet, it's just as serious. He says there's a real possibility, if we don't apply the solution, encourage one another daily, there's the real possibility that as long as this pattern continues of missing, their heart will get hardened more and more. Now, the first time a person misses worship, let me suggest to you there is some spiritual issue going on. If the person realizes that God asked them to worship, they have a divine appointment with God, and that here they get a chance to draw near to him, they get to remember his son, they get to encourage one another, and then they get to build up their own faith. When they choose willfully, not talking about sickness, not talking about travel, not talking about work, we're not talking about the exceptions where a person can't be here, it's when someone chooses not to. There's something spiritually amiss, would you agree? Now, it might be a minor thing. It might just be one of those days, but they still need encouragement. Because if that one miss turns into 2, their heart gets a little hardened, and they get a little more used to not being here. And it doesn't bother them, their conscience, as much. And then when 2 turns into 3, and you can see the pattern, their heart can be so hardened that they fall away entirely. And then if someone does not look out to search for them because they notice they're missing, they go, I've been gone 4 weeks. No one even noticed. They don't even care. No one's called. I haven't heard from anyone. So I guess it really doesn't matter if I go or not. Now, does that happen? Yes. It happens. I hear that report, not necessarily from here, but it has happened even in the past. Now, it's not because people don't care. Maybe it's we're not aware. And so that's why we're talking about this. And the elders are going to, as Jack just introduced, introduce an effort to encourage people. Because when one person misses, it's a sign of something going on in their life. And it might be just a simple thing, and it might be more troublesome. But when one miss turns into two, it turns into three, we're going to see there's going to be problems. So we don't want anyone more to miss. So when we encourage one another day after day. So the first thing is watch out. Now we take attendance every Sunday. I don't know if you all know that. But if we don't do anything with attendance, those records, then we might as well not take it. So we take them to find out who's here and who's not here so we can gauge the health of the congregation, because that's just one litmus test over many. You know, attendance isn't everything. Someone could attend faithfully and be a totally unfaithful Christian. Is that true? I mean, they could be cheating on the side, stealing. Who knows what they're doing? Just because a person's here, that doesn't mean they're necessarily faithful. There's lots of other litmus tests. You know, their prayer life, their reading devotional life, lots of other things. But attendance is a sign of a person's spirituality. And so watch out the warning. And that's why he says, and we got to pay close attention to the gospel that we've heard. That was our lesson this morning, lest you drift from it. See, it doesn't just happen overnight. It's a slow process, isn't it? And that's how people fall away. And so we can't neglect these issues or allow other people to neglect, because it's a real serious possibility they can fall away entirely. So there's the warning. And then we see the solution that's given to us. He says, encourage one another day after day. Now that word encourage is used many times in the New Testament, and it comes from a word that in the Greek is a compound word. It means to call one to your side. That's simply what it means. And so I have to use William, because sometimes he comes, sometimes he doesn't. But, hey, William, come on over here. And it's just so cute when he comes running over. You put him on your knee and you have a little talk with him, right? Say, it's good to see you. How's it going? You know, do a fist bump and all that, and send him on his way. I say that because that's really the essence of encouraging. It's not to lecture. It's not to put a guilt trip on. It's not to offend someone. It's to encourage. And sometimes everyone needs that kind of encouragement. And it's just like sometimes just putting your arm around, hey, good job tonight. I know that one start was kind of tough, but next time you'll nail it. Good to see you up there, right? Does everyone need that? And it's done with gentleness, and it's done with positiveness. That's what this word encourage means. Now, there's a stronger word to rebuke or to exhort, but here he's talking about encouraging. So I know there's times you didn't want to go to service. Well, I've had those. And there's times we chose to act on that desire not to go. We stayed home. There's some danger there, though. It's a little danger, but if it builds, it can become a big danger. And if a person were to call you, say, you know, I'll use Dean. Dean, you're always at service. So I knew that if you weren't here tonight or this morning, you must have been sick or something. So I'm just seeing if you're okay, because it's not like you. See how I tried to make it positive? He's always here. Something has to be wrong. Is everything okay? And he says, well, yeah, I was sick. Oh, good. We can pray for you. I mean, good. You were sick. Good that it wasn't something else, right? Well, I'm glad I called, and we'll pray for you. Now, that's encouraging, isn't it? And then what if you call and you find out, well, I'm just heard my dad died. Wow, do you need to know that? You need that information? And if you never made the call or the reaching out, you can never then be there and weep with those that weep. So it's so important that we act when someone's missing. And not that we set up a red flag and everyone just go all at the same time, but there has to be some effort that each person, when you notice someone that usually sits by you is not there, that you reach out to them. You do your part. Encourage one another as long as it's still called today. That's the solution. That's what God is asking us to do. He's telling us to do that because he cares about each one that he's purchased with his son's blood, and he's depending on us to help keep the saved safe, to keep them saved. And we are God's hands and his voice in those areas. And so that's the solution. And so we have to help out because we don't want anyone to fall away. And so there's the exhortation, and it's borrowed from Psalms 95. And the idea that we will have this confidence of going to heaven if we hold fast. Now, sometimes we have to help someone stand up spiritually. 1 Thessalonians 5, he talks about a progression of weakness. Some people are sick spiritually. Some people are close to dying spiritually. But some, he says, are just weak. Now, when someone's weak, just because they've had trials and problems, they just need someone to stand beside them, help them stand up. To put your arm around them. Hey, we'll walk together. We'll do this together. I believe in you. God does. We can get through this together. Galatians chapter 6 says, bear one another burdens and thus fulfill the law of Christ. That's interesting. That's the law of Christ. Well, why? Because he bore our burdens. Didn't he? On the cross. So he says, I'm just asking you to do the same for one another. We don't ever have this attitude, well, it's their life, they can live it themselves. No, we're in this together. And so sometimes I just have to go to people and put my arm around them and help them through their walk until they're able to stand on their own 2 feet so they can hold fast. That's the exhortation that's been given to us. And so the challenge is in every church, there's people that fall away. It's happened here. Every congregation I've been part of, there are people that fall away. Now, there's 2 quick reasons. The first reason is Jesus said it'll be that way, right? 4 types of soil. The hard path, the rocky soil, and the thorny soil. The rocky soil, it springs up, and the people, as soon as things get hard, they just wilt away, and you never see them again. The thorny soil, they're here, but they never bear fruit. The good soil produces fruit. Jesus said it's going to happen. And so we have to expect it to happen then. The other part is because people are neglected. And that's on us. They're neglected. I've told you the story about Willis New, who would knock on my window sometimes out at the dorm, say, Jack, get up, let's go to services. He was there to encourage me. If it wasn't for that, I've shared this. I don't know if I'd be here today. And so the reasons are many. Sometimes they're young spiritually, and they just need someone to mentor them. Sometimes they're weak spiritually or sick. Maybe it's just trials they're going through, because it's tough being a Christian sometimes, especially when your family's not one. Maybe they got involved in some sin, and they don't know how to get out of it. We've all been there. Maybe they've encountered false teachers that are confusing their mind with doubt and lies. Maybe it's just their choice. But here's what I want you to see. Failure to worship in any of these cases only quickens their demise. It doesn't help them. It actually makes matters worse. But it's often natural. If there's sin in someone's life, they feel kind of guilty. They don't want to go to worship. The last place they want to be. So now their sin is compounded by neglecting God and feeding themselves spiritually. And so when people miss, it should set off all these warning signs to us that there's a problem here. Don't know why. But we have to do something about it. Remember, Jesus gave the story about the shepherd who had 100 sheep, but he lost just one. And he left the 99 just to find one. That's what our shepherds are going to employ, that type of attitude. Because as our elders, they're our shepherds, and they want to look after every single sheep, and they need your involvement in that. And so we don't want anyone to miss. In 1 Corinthians chapter 11, speaking about the Lord's Supper, but since they weren't doing it in a correct way, and I'd suggest not doing it at all is the same guilt as incurred. He said, because that reason, some are weak, some are sick, and some are asleep. He's talking about spiritually. When we don't partake of the Lord's Supper the correct way, or if we miss it entirely, some become weak, some become sick, and some spiritually become dead. That's how serious it is, just missing, all right? And so we got to speak out. We have to do something, because when God asks us to do something and we fail to do it, is that not sin? That's the essence of sin. And no matter how I package it and try to put it nicely, if God says, please do this, whether you see it as a command or just a request, failure to do God's will is sin in our lives. We have to do something. And God bless our elders. They want to take up this cause. And so you've heard Edmund Burke's quote, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And that's true. Therefore, to the one who knows the right thing to do, James says, but doesn't do it, to him it is sin. So when we know the right thing and don't do it, we have to, it's sin. We're not going to go down that path. We're going to take action. So 1 Thessalonians, Paul says, encourage one another, build up one another, just as you're also doing. This congregation does a great job. Ann was going to ask to thank the congregation, so I'll do it for her. She got 3 thank you cards today. Now, they're thank you cards because she did some acts of service, and people were thanking her for it. It's like, well, isn't that nice? People are thanking someone for thinking of them, encouragement. This congregation is really good about looking out after each other. That's what I'm trying to say. But Paul asks us to excel still more. And if there's a little hole where people are falling through the cracks, let's plug that hole by making sure when people aren't at worship, we're looking out after them. That's what Paul's asking us to do. So when we're all said and done, we want to just encourage. And so when we look at it on the service, there's no missing pieces because every part is important, aren't they? Every part. So we're glad you're here. That's our lesson. We're going to sing this song, and it's angry words, so let them never. You say, well, that's a curious way to end this lesson. But it's really the chorus. What is the chorus all about? Loving one another. So I want you to think about those words, and if we can help you in any way, won't you come forward as Gary leads us?